This is my pre-calculus in-class practice number 2 for my trigonometry unit, and we're going to find formulas for the following two trigonomic graphs. And remember that you're going to use basically two trig formulas for me. You're going to use trig graphs. One is going to be sine, which we know starts at midline, and we're going to use cosine, which starts high. Okay, and remember, I also will do the inverted graph. So if I have a negative sign, it's been reflected over the x-axis. So I'm still going to start at midline, but I'm going to come down and then up. And the negative cosine curve, again, is reflected over the x-axis. So instead of starting high, it's going to start low and come down like this. Okay, so basically you have two choices, but really four. So as you look at the graph, we're going to look at this first one here on the left, and I always want you to stack and rack the following. Looks like amplitude, frequency, period, and midline. And remember, I do not want you to write AFPM. Do it like that, and please use equal signs, not just a dash, because it looks like a negative. Also, I want you to remember that when you're looking at this, I'm not going to require any shifts, so you're going to look at your y-axis and see what your graph is doing. So I kind of trace it and say, okay, here's my y-axis. My graph starts here. It comes all the way up and comes down to here and ends. So there is one curve. They gave me the 0.5 pi 4, so I know that this is a 4 here, and this is at 5 pi. And I see that it doesn't start at the midline, so I know it's not sine or negative sine, so it's got to be cosine or negative cosine, and since it's starting low, this looks like negative cosine, okay? I always do the midline first, so I take my high plus my low, so 0 plus 4 divided by 2 is 2, and so y equals 2 is my midline. And then I take my amplitude, I take my high, which is 4 minus my midline, or midline minus my low, and I get 2 for my amplitude. Okay. Now, because it's a graph, the frequency is in my equation, the period is on my graph. I come through and say, okay, halfway is 5 pi, all the way is 10 pi, so that's my period, which equals 2 pi over my frequency, because I got to find the frequency. And if you cross multiply, you'll notice that these two will switch places. So really my frequency is 2 pi over 10 pi. They cross off, and that's 1/5. So now I have all that's necessary. And this is in the order that it's supposed to be for your equation. So they use y's and x's. So I say y equals, my amplitude comes first, but don't forget that negative sign because it's been inverted, -2. My trig function comes next, cosine, parentheses, my frequency comes next, 1/5, and my variable is x, close your parentheses, and then I'm raising it up 2, so I'm going to do +2. So right here is the equation of this. So this poor little cosine curve, not only was it inverted or reflected, but I stretched it by 2 because that's my amplitude. I see 1/5 of it, so it's been horizontally stretched as well, and I raised it up 2. Okay, let's look at our next one here, but before I even do it, I'm going to set up that looks like amplitude, frequency, period, and midline. Okay. So I always look at my y-axis and I kind of trace it. So I see there's a lot of curves, but I'm just going to do one. And one curve, they always end up where they start, and there is one curve. And I see that this looks like the middle, I think, but we'll figure that out in a minute. So it's not starting at the middle, so it's not sine or negative sine, and this one starts high, so this looks like cosine. Okay. First thing I do is the midline. I take the high, which is 35, plus the low of 5, and divide it by 2. It's like an average. 40 divided by 2 is 20. So y equals 20 is my midline. So I'm going to come up here and check and make sure it looks like here. So I'm going to actually draw it. I suggest you do as well, because I usually have people who will subtract those two, and I want you to add it. It's like an average. The other thing is, too, is I want to see you doing this. I don't want you to just say it's 20. I want you to do this because it takes the guesswork out. Come up to your amplitude. I want to see you doing this as well, saying my high minus the midline I just found is 15. I know that you can just look and see that, but please do that as well. Frequencies in my equation, so I've got to do my period first. So I said, how long did it take me to see the whole curve? It took me 12. So my period is going to be, 12 equals 2 pi over my frequency. Again, these two switch places, so it's going to be basically 2 pi divided by 12 or pi over 6. Okay? So my equation for this is going to be y equals 15, because your amplitude goes first, cosine, parentheses, my frequency is next, pi over 6, my variable, and then I'm going to add my midline, which is 20, because I raised it up. So this poor cosine curve, it got stretched 15, and then here's my pi over 6 for my frequency, and then I raised it up 20. So there is this curve as well. Okay? So I hope this helps on finding equations of graphs for trigonometric functions.